Go ahead. Okay, Treasurer Chum.
Morning.
To the Director of Finance, Mr. Ortega. Ms. Higa. Ms. Dillon. Mr. Keeley. Mr. Rosensteel. For the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Mr. Zeiger. Mr. Unterman. And Controller Yee. Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Move approval.
I'm sorry, Ms. Hendricks, were you going to make some changes to the
I
placement?
was going to mention those in closed session. Do you want me to
Okay.
mention those in open session?
If it's not going to
It's
affect
relevant
the
to
public,
closed
it's
session
only
only.
relevant, that's
Yep.
fine, we do that.
Thanks. Great. So I think we'll move into closed session, correct, Brian?
And we ask those that are not
So
part
anyone
of
who
the
is
staff,
not
who's
a
not,
CalSTRS staff or consultant needs to
Consultant
leave
to-
the room for closed session. And just so for those of you who are walking out the door, I believe the plan is we'll reconvene at 10:30 for open session, correct, Jack?
The room will probably be open about 10:15.
Yeah, but we'll get started around 10:30 in open session, just for those of you who are leaving.
Sharon, can you say it again? It was hard.
Sorry. So those of you who are leaving, we'll be back in open session at approximately 10:30. Thanks. Investment Committee, welcome everyone. Friday morning. Hopefully everyone got here and didn't get too wet and blown over by the storm that we're having. My mic is on, so I'll talk louder. How's that? Right? My mic is on, Danielle? Okay. So we're excited about this morning's item. We're on agenda item 7, the Investment Insight Program about climate change. So it's appropriate, I guess, that it's raining and windy and blustery outside. But we're really looking forward to the conversation this morning. And so do we have our speakers here somewhere? I was going to do introductions, but it feels awkward to not to do introductions without the people in front of me. So I guess I thought we were ready to go. Jack, where's Jack? Where's?
Let me go get him.
What do you guys all think about the Super Bowl?
They should have given it to Lynch.
No,
They
the
should have passed.
The pass was okay.
No,
It
they
was
sh-
the wrong call.
They should have run. They should have run.
No, the theory was a pass. You get a dead ball, then you run. You get a timeout, then you run. But you don't throw a pass into the field. You run him out and throw it long.
Should have run. Should have run with the ball. So I'm saying that's my last word, Harry. I don't want to hear what you have to
Shoulda
say
given it
about
to
Tom
Lynch.
Brady.
Number 5.
So,
So close.
do you want me to make my comment about SoCal, NorCal again?
Oh no. That was only suitable for closed
Go ahead, we're in
session.
open
Sorry.
session. Go ahead.
How is it out there? Is it pretty- I was
Gotta
just
mind
looking
the
through
dag
the window
is
there. Great. Good morning.
Morning.
Morning, Mr. Vice President.
So again, we're really grateful to have Vice President Al Gore with us, David Blood with us, and I'd like to just give a brief introduction so that everyone is aware. Again, this is our item 7 in open session about our investment committee has made a point of inviting special guests to come in and speak to us about cutting edge issues around investments. And I know our board has had different conversations amongst ourselves and as a board about sustainability, and we have various opinions about that, and we are just really starting a conversation about that on our investment committee and on our board. But we're really pleased to have Vice President Al Gore and David Blood come to talk to us today. We have a partnership with the fund Generation, and we are really excited to learn, ask questions, and hopefully have some great interaction this morning. So I'm going to make a quick introduction, and then I'll let you guys take it away. U.S. Vice President and winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, Al Gore, is here today to speak before our investment committee of the Teachers Retirement Board. This presentation, as I mentioned, is part of our prioritization of sustainability as a key long-term business objective for our system, for CalSTRS. Mr. Gore is speaking on the relevance of climate change to the investor voice in his current role as co-founder and chairman of Generation Investment Management, a leading advocate for confronting the threat of global warming. Joining Mr. Gore at the podium will be David Blood, Generation's senior partner and former CEO of Goldman Sachs Asset Management. In 2007, CalSTRS was the first U.S. fund to hire Generation Investment Management as part of its mission to manage the risks and capture the opportunities associated with global sustainability issues. In addition to serving as vice president from 1993 to 2001 under former President Bill Clinton, Mr. Gore served in both the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. He's the author of several bestsellers, including An Inconvenient Truth, you might have heard of that one, also the subject of an Oscar-winning documentary in 2006. He's the co-recipient with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize for informing the world of the dangers posed by climate change. So Vice President Al Gore, David Blood, welcome to CalSTRS, and we look forward to our interactions with you this morning.
Well, thank you very much. It's really an honor to be here. I'm going to stand up in a minute and show some pictures, but thank you very much, Vice Chair Hendricks, and to the chair of this committee, Harry Keeley. I want to acknowledge John Chang, Treasurer, and Betty Yee, Controller, Chris, and Jack Enos, who we deal with quite a bit, your CEO, and thank you for inviting us, and Chris Ailman, CIO, to all the members of the committee, to all the members of the board who are present. I'm very pleased to be here with my co-founder and partner, David Blood. We have one joke between us, and I'm going to grab it before David has a chance to use it. When we were first forming Generation more than a decade ago, it's a joke, but I was really serious in proposing that we name the firm Blood and Gore. But the other, I was serious because I thought it would be memorable, but you know, I came out of a different tradition. But anyway, we are so excited about the dialogue that we've had with CalSTRS. We have learned a lot. We have enjoyed it immensely. For us, sustainability has a broader meaning than only environmental sustainability. You're quite well aware of that. I'm not going to waste words on that, but I am going to focus this morning in my part of our joint presentation on the climate crisis and on the related factors coming with the climate crisis that change the way investors should be looking at what we're facing. And so with your permission, I'll stand and go to the computer here. And I don't know if y'all are going to look at the big screen or the ones, you've got them in front of you, so we'll do it this way. I usually start with these pictures of the Earth to try to define the context of what we're talking about, because it is a challenge for any of us to break out of our normal frame of reference and realize that with more than 7 billion people and incredibly powerful technologies, we are now in an era where we're pressing against some of the limits of the Earth's ecological systems. And the most vulnerable of those systems is illustrated in this image, which shows, of course, that the sky, far from being a vast and limitless expanse, it viscerally appears so when you look up at the sky. But as these images from space make clear, it's actually a very thin layer surrounding the planet. And the total volume of that layer is actually surprisingly small. And now we are putting 110 million tons of global warming pollution into it every single day as if it's an open sewer. Years ago, decades, well, in a previous century, 2 previous centuries, a famous doctor connected the dots between the sewage system of London and cholera, and then they discovered how to control that. Well, we're still using the Earth's atmosphere as an open sewer, and the consequences are becoming quite serious. Most of it is from CO2, the burning of fossil fuels, but don't worry about covering all the topics referred to in this slide. It is intended to put the CO2 issue in context. All of these other factors are involved: industrial agriculture, mining, forest burning, the beginnings of releases of methane from the melting permafrost in the Arctic. They're all significant, but the main part of the problem by far is the rapidly growing increase in CO2 emissions, because our global civilization depends on fossil fuels for 85% of the energy that we use. That's beginning to change, thankfully, and in the second part of my short presentation, I'm going to get into why I'm so excited about the transition that is beginning now. Some California companies have been right in the forefront, as you all are well aware, but I'll get to that in a moment. These CO2 emissions build up in the atmosphere, and as they do, the temperature increases because the outgoing infrared radiation is trapped by the CO2 and other global warming heat-trapping gases. This is a 2,000-year measurement of both CO2 and temperature. And the total amount of global warming pollution that is in the atmosphere today is equivalent to the energy. It traps as much extra energy every day as would be released by 400,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs going off every day. It's a big planet, but that is a lot of energy, particularly when it is multiplied by 400,000 times every 24 hours. And it is having an impact. This is the only complicated slide that I'm going to show, so permit me to spend just a moment explaining what it represents. Those of you familiar with statistics, more so than me, will get it right away, but the white represents normal day temperatures. The blue are cooler than normal days, and the red are warmer than normal days. This team of scientists led by Jim Hansen, who used to be at NASA, measured all of the temperatures throughout the entire world over a 60-year period. And they picked the beginning of the second half of the 20th century, 1951 to 1980, as a so-called normal period for a point of reference. And what you can see is that during the 1980s, this whole band began to shift to the right, and you get the appearance of a statistically significant number of extremely hot days in the lower right. During the 1990s, it shifted further, and the extremely hot days increase in number. And in the last 10 years, all of a sudden, there are many more extremely hot days than cooler than average days. And the warmer days and hot days predominate. In fact, the extremely hot days are now 100 times more common than they were just 40 years ago. And this has consequences. Last year was the 38th year in a row with temperatures above the 20th century average. Last month was the 359th month in a row with temperatures above the 20th century average. This last decade was by far the hottest decade ever measured globally. And 14 of the 15 hottest years on record have occurred in the first 14 years of this century. And the hottest of all, so designated by 4 different scientific groups globally, was this past year. This has consequences for people, for animals, for plants, and for ecosystems. This was the worst heat wave in the history of India last summer. This woman is frying pork and shrimp on the back of a car in Shandong province. But on a global basis, 90% of all this extra heat goes into the oceans. And the scientists in the last couple of years have found ways to more accurately measure it. This is what it looks like. The heat is building up quite dramatically in the oceans, and this has a number of consequences, direct and indirect. First of all, 1 year ago, Super Typhoon Haiyan came across areas of the Pacific that were 3.5 degrees Celsius, 5 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than normal, and so it became the strongest and most destructive storm ever to make landfall. 4.1 million refugees, homeless, thousands of people killed. Pope Francis just visited there 3 weeks ago and spoke about the climate crisis, as he has done on a number of occasions. He will issue a much-awaited encyclical on the climate crisis in June. So 2 years ago, in the North Atlantic, the areas just to the windward of New York and New Jersey were 5 degrees Celsius, almost 9 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than normal. So Superstorm Sandy became a monster storm, devastating the Jersey coast and Manhattan. It had been predicted that at some point in the future, the World Trade Center Memorial Site might flood. Well, it happened much sooner than anticipated.
The Hudson River, downtown Manhattan, was literally pouring into the ground zero site.
So as these temperatures increase in the oceans, there are other consequences. This shows not water, but water vapor. And as the oceans increase in temperature, the amount of water vapor coming off the oceans increases quite significantly, and the warmer air holds more water vapor. Each 1 degree increase increases the holding capacity by 7%. So that water vapor is then funneled onto the land masses to where storm conditions release the precipitation, either as rain or snow. It's shifting toward rain from snow, of course, but there are giant snowfalls now as well. This is a picture in Montana that illustrates that the water hitting the ground there does not come just from the part of the sky directly above where it falls. If you have a bathtub filled with water and open the drain, obviously the water rushing down the drain doesn't come just from the part of the tub directly above the drain, it comes from the whole tub. And in a similar way, these storms will often reach out 2,000 kilometers, and they funnel that massive increase in water vapor toward the point where it's released. So we get these massive increases in downpours, floods, mudslides, and landslides all over the world. This was in Florida last year, Pensacola, 61 centimeters of rain in 24 hours. This storm went up the East Coast. 1 day later, it hit Baltimore, and a passerby with a cell phone video took this image. The infrastructure that we have built was designed for a world very different from the one that we are bringing into being now. And I've got a whole separate presentation on infrastructure issues around the world. The cost is very high and growing. This is Montpellier, France, last September 29th. 10 inches of rain in only 3 hours. I always thought they ought to call it Montpelier because it's named after a city in Vermont. But this was Genoa last October. This was the second of 3 events that caused devastation and economic ruin and political consequences. This was just a little over a month ago. In Malaysia, more than 250,000 people driven from their homes. This was Greece in December. This was just a few days ago. This was a very historic bridge that shows up in a lot of the tourist photos. It's been there for a long, long time, but was just destroyed. This was 2 days ago in Bulgaria. Where right outside of the capital city, Sofia, devastating floods, neighboring Albania, and in Turkey. These areas have been very hard hit. This was in India, in Uttarakhand state. This is a brief video of this event, 14.5 inches in one day. I'm not going to show all of this. They're very moving interviews with some of the people who were affected by this event. And all over the world, people are saying the same things. We've never seen anything like this. What's happening? Well, I'm going to move on. This was also in India. In nearby Pakistan, almost 14 inches of rain in 24 hours. And this recalls for us the event 4 years ago, the very historic flooding in Pakistan that displaced 20 million people, further destabilizing a nuclear-armed country. This was just 6 weeks ago in Indonesia. These mudslides have become very common. An enormous number of people killed by the mudslides last year in Afghanistan. This is one of several in California. This was in El Salvador a few years ago, 5 feet of rain in 10 days. 5 feet in 10 days. Mexico has been hit a number of times. Last year in England, the largest floods in the history of England, thousands of homes submerged for more than 6 weeks. Central Europe, Germany, and 5 other countries had what was described as a 500-year flood. But again, as the bell curve I showed earlier demonstrates, these statistics can no longer be relied upon. They're no longer relevant. This was in Hiroshima Prefecture a few months ago, and in Chongqing, China. These mudslides are becoming quite common. 3 million people displaced last summer by this flooding in China. This was in Sichuan province, similar to what we saw in India. 6 million people affected by this event. And this was just a few weeks ago in Malawi, where 683,000 people were displaced by this flooding, 200,000 homeless for an extended period. This is not long ago, and this was the agricultural breadbasket of Malawi. And the impact on agriculture is one that I'll discuss in just a moment. But let me shift gears now, because another consequence of this huge buildup of heat is that the same heat that evaporates more water vapor off the oceans pulls it out of the first several centimeters of the soil and makes the droughts longer and deeper. This is in Sao Paulo, Brazil. We just did a 3-day training down there in an NGO that I head up. 140 cities were rationing water last year. Sao Paulo, the largest city in our hemisphere, is now debating a scheme of rationing that would be 2 days on, 5 days off. The political decisions are difficult, and they've been pushing them away. The main reservoir, not this one, but the other one, is now at 5% capacity. This is a few months ago in China, Henan, an agricultural powerhouse. Many other surrounding provinces hit as well. This is the largest lake in China a few years ago, the largest freshwater lake. This was just a month ago. It's still like this. This was one of the most prolific fishing areas in China. This fall in Indonesia, 20 provinces hit by drought, both Koreas, the worst drought in recorded history. Last fall in Central America, a serious hunger in Nicaragua. In Guatemala, 80% of the corn crop was destroyed. And of course, here in California, 98% of the state continues in drought, 39% in exceptional drought. And the reservoirs, as you all know extremely well, are dangerously low. The mountain, January was the driest in the history of California. The snowpack has been dangerously low. Everybody's hoping that an El Nino will replenish the reservoirs, but of course in the immediate aftermath of a drought, that also brings its own consequences. But the patterns that people have grown up feeling used to and comfortable with are no longer predictable. Most of all in developing countries where sustainable agriculture has depended on what farmers have learned from their grandparents and parents about the rainy season, dry season cycle, and it's all mixed up now. Of course, drought and dryness and heat bring fire. California has seen more than its share of fire. The predictions in the western half of North America are quite sobering. As much as a 600% increase in median area burned in many parts of the West. It's hard to wrap your mind around these consequences. This was one fire last fall, the Bowles Fire in Weed, California, and it's a useful reminder that we're talking about families. We're talking about real people whose lives are profoundly disrupted, and connecting the dots between using the Earth's atmosphere as an open sewer and creating such a huge increase in fire, drought, floods, mudslides, et cetera, is part of the point I'm trying to make. This was last month in Australia. It's a land of fire, but they have had nothing in their experience that compares to what they're experiencing now. The firefighters in Australia have organized themselves to meet with scientists and campaign against global warming. They had a relay race across most of the country, stopping in every town, trying to tell people we've got to do something about the climate crisis. This was last year in Valparaiso, Chile, by far the biggest fire in the history of this city. Much of the city was devastated as a result. Probably the most serious fire of the last few years was in Russia. The worst drought and fires in their 1,000 years of recorded history. And 55,000 people died, but 4 months later, there were other consequences. Russia, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan pulled all of their grain off of world markets, and food prices globally hit the second all-time high in 3 years, and there were food riots in 60 countries for one of those peaks, 30 countries for another peak. This is in Bolivia and India. This is in Tunis. It was, after all, a food vendor who set himself on fire at the moment of the all-time high food prices. Many other factors involved, of course, but this is one reason why the U.S. Department of Defense this fall issued yet another dire warning that the climate crisis is intensifying the challenges of conflict, instability, hunger, and poverty. We saw this in Syria. There are many reasons why the gates of hell opened in Syria, but the internal discussions of the Syrian government pointed years ago to the climate-related 2006 to 2010 drought that destroyed 60% of their farms, 80% of their livestock, and drove 1 million refugees from the rural areas into the cities, where they collided with another 1 million refugees from the Iraq War. And their officials warned privately, we cannot handle this. It's a difficult country to govern in the best of circumstances, but in many areas, the Pentagon and others are worried about the consequences of this. So the cost of carbon pollution are mounting up in these and many other ways. Many of them I haven't even talked about, the spread of tropical diseases into the higher latitudes. I'll just mention one more, and that's sea level rise because of the melting of Greenland and Antarctica. It's worth paying attention to. These are the 10 cities most at risk according to their population. These are the 10 cities most at risk according to their assets at risk. Miami is number 1, New York, number 3. You have perhaps seen the maps with the water lapping up to the shores of Sacramento, given certain scenarios that the scientists are now saying must be planned for. In Miami, it's already happening. There had been no rain for quite some time when this video was taken. This is just a high tide. and the seawater is coming up through the storm sewers and manhole covers. And, you know, some of their elected officials are climate deniers. I imagine them sloshing through this thing. I don't notice anything. Do you notice anything? I don't know. It's kind of hard to notice. The insurance industry has not missed it. The insurance availability in some of these areas is already being constricted. And of course, some of the worst consequences are for those who live in the low-lying areas, Pacific Island nations, Delta nations like in Bangladesh. Kiribati put a new budget item in a few years ago, a fund to purchase a new country. They're moving their entire population. And we have seen this in history where some civilizations made the wrong choices with regard to managing their relationship to the ecology within which they live. The difference now is that it's not an island civilization remote from the rest of the world. It's a global civilization. And so we have to adjust. Luckily, we do have the solutions at hand. And this is the part that I'm really excited to share with you today. Just 14 years ago, the predictions for wind capacity were that they would increase 30 gigawatts by 2010. We exceeded that projection by 10 times over. We are now seeing, of course, the continued dramatic reduction in costs, both onshore and offshore. And the wind capacity has been shooting upwards all over the world, creating millions of new jobs. There are more jobs in wind than coal in the United States. Now more jobs in solar than coal as well. And speaking of solar, just 12 years ago, the projection by the experts was that we would increase photovoltaic electricity production by 1 gigawatt per year by 2010. We beat that goal 17 times over. Last year, we beat that goal 48 times over. This year, we're on track to beat it 62 times over. Now, those of you who live in California are perhaps more aware than most that there are precedents for this. For example, the computer chip industry, the cell phone industry, flat screen TVs like this one. There are certain areas of technology that yield to dramatic improvements with innovation. Whole system costs begin to come down. Every part of the cost comes down. This is really quite dramatic. Look at the cost declines for crystalline silicon solar cells. They are continuing to come down. Just 3 weeks ago, in the Middle East, the Dubai Water and Electric Utility put out bids. I don't have a slide on this, but it's the talk of the industry. And the winning bid was 5.9 cents per kilowatt hour. No government subsidy, no government involvement. A straight, legitimate bidding process. That's the cheapest electricity you can find. And it is now being replicated in many other places. Look at the world's installation of photovoltaic energy. This is really shocking to many people who didn't believe it could improve this quickly. Deutsche Bank is one of many investment firms that has pointed out that grid parity, the point where the price of solar electricity goes below the price of the competition, that's a big deal. I've noticed in the business world that there appears to be a big difference between more expensive than and cheaper than. And it's a little bit like the difference between 32 degrees Fahrenheit and 33 degrees Fahrenheit, or 0 and 1 Celsius. That's the difference not of 1 degree, it's the difference between ice and water. And in markets, it's the difference between markets that are frozen up and markets that are liquid. So we're now seeing solar cells on the top of grass huts. This is in South Sudan. And new business models such as pay-as-you-go. I have a friend who does this in India, and he told of negotiating with a woman householder who said 30 rupees a month is too much. And he said, well, what about 1 rupee per day? And she said, okay, I can do that. And She knows perfectly well that there are 30 days in a month, but she wants the pay-as-you-go. Look at Bangladesh. Bangladesh is the fastest deploying PV country in the world. On average, 2 new rooftop systems per minute, night and day, 24 hours a day. This is happening all over the world. People in poor countries, here one of the poorest countries, Sierra Leone, want their children to have access to light they can read by without the indoor air pollution that causes such harm, and to gain access to the world of digital knowledge. A developed country, Australia, 1 in 7 homes now have PV electricity on the roof. The state of Victoria is closing in on 1 out of every 2 homes. Chile, since President Bachelet has taken office, they've gone from this to this. And all over the world, we're seeing these dramatic success stories. Germany, which is at a very high latitude, very cloudy, now closing in on almost 1/3 of their energy from solar and wind. One day last year, 74% of their energy from solar and wind. The Vatican has announced that it will be the first nation to be CO2 neutral. Now they have 2 advantages. So they're very small, and God is on their side. But on a global basis, this is an astonishing truth. You've heard of an inconvenient truth. This is an astonishing truth. Enough solar energy reaches the surface of the earth every hour to provide 100% of the entire world's energy needs for a full year. So if and as we increase the fraction of that energy that we're capable of harvesting, then obviously that's where the future lies. The age of renewables is beginning. Warren Buffett, not known for soft-headed investing, invested $15 billion in wind and solar and has doubled down with a commitment to another $15 billion in wind and solar. Green bonds, a 15-fold increase just in the last 2 years. It really is incredible. And most of this is being paid for by the private sector, almost 2/3. It is the greatest opportunity to create new jobs the world has ever seen. And by the way, with the global economy in its current parlous state, it would be nice to have a project that mobilizes countries around the world and puts tens of millions of people to work. Well, we have one. So here is the global investment in new generating capacity. The lines crossed in 2009. Renewable energy took over the lead from fossil investments. In 2013, the lead was extended this past year. I will note that the fossil estimate on that is still estimated. This is from Bloomberg New Energy Finance, and they feel that's the accurate number. It'll come in shortly. So before I close, I do want to focus on this. There's been a lot of discussion about subprime carbon assets, stranded carbon assets. This is a representation of all of the carbon-based energy that the world has burned since the first oil well was drilled in the middle of the 19th century. This is the amount of that total that has been burned in the last 14 years. So the rate of burning is increasing. This is the volume of proven reserves. Now, the unproven reserves, the deep, we've got more than enough to incinerate the planet many times over. But these are the proven reserves that are currently being carried on the books of the multinational oil companies, carbon companies, and sovereigns. This is the amount the scientific community says can be burned and still give us a good chance of staying below the threshold beyond which all bets are off for the future of human civilization. So what about the amount outside that dark bubble? That's what's called unburnable carbon. Don't take it from me. The head of the Central Bank of the United Kingdom has made this statement: the vast majority of these carbon reserves are unburnable. Well, we saw what happened when some mortgages became unsellable. The subprime mortgages, you know, the ones given to people who couldn't make a down payment or make the monthly payments. What were they thinking, given 7.5 million of those out in the U.S. alone? When reality intruded and their value suddenly collapsed, they became stranded assets. So it's something to think about. There are other reasons why coal is declining rapidly. You've seen the stories about impending bankruptcies in many of the large coal companies. Look at China. Their coal use just went down. And here's one of the reasons why. The airpocalypse. Life expectancy in northern China has declined 5.5 years already before the lung cancer epidemic sets in. The Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences says that it's nearing a point that's no longer livable. The mayor of Beijing just last week said, our city is no longer livable. Elites are moving out. You've seen the stories. So we need to put a price on carbon in markets. And in order to do so, we need to put a price on denial in politics. And this is one of the reasons why, given the relative paralysis in several political systems, not in California's, and I'll show you, not in a lot of places, investors are leading the way, taking a much clearer view of the future because facts predominate over ideology and petty politics. These are the countries and regions that already have an emissions trading system or a carbon tax. California proudly stands as one of the leaders and has linked up with Mexico and with British Columbia and with Quebec. And all of these nations around the world, including the EU, have already done it. These are the areas and nations where these proposals are pending. China announced 2 days ago that it will launch a nationwide carbon emissions cap and trade system less than 18 months from now. When China's market links up with the EU and with California and the other regions and provinces in North America and the other regions, we will see a dramatic change in the market. And of course, the United States is now pending a mandatory reduction in CO2 emissions, which is also going to have a major impact and made it possible for the historic agreement between President Obama and President Xi Jinping of China. China is serious about this. People say it's a good news, bad news story. It's increasingly mainly a good news story. They are moving very aggressively to limit carbon emissions. Last September, Jack Enos was there, made a beautiful statement at the United Nations. Outside, there were an estimated 400,000 people marching for an agreement on climate. Tens of thousands marched in other cities. This December, the nations of the world will meet in Paris and will get an agreement. I say that confidently. The great American poet Wallace Stevens once wrote, "After the last no comes a yes." And on that yes, the future world depends. We heard a lot of no's for giving women the right to vote, and there came a yes. We heard no's on civil rights, and there came a yes. We heard no's on GLBT rights, and now we are getting to a yes, with California once again leading the way. We know what the future holds. This is our home. Investors and business leaders are now leading the way, and I'm going to turn it over now to my co-founder, our senior partner of Generation, David Blood. Thank you.
I would like to complain to start with. Why did I have to follow him? There should be a better deal, I would have thought. So we're going to go from a inspirational discussion on climate to investment and all of that goes with that. And so I'm the boring bit of the Blood and Gore combination. But I thought I would give you just a little bit of background, in some ways a reminder about what Generation is And then I want to talk about why we integrate sustainability into our investment processes and make the business case for sustainable investing, and then stop and then hopefully enter into a dialogue with all of you, including Al. So Generation is now nearly 11 years old. We manage $12 billion worth of assets in 3 different strategies: concentrated global equity, which we have had the honor of working with you all for nearly 8 years. We manage a growth equity strategy that is investing in the transition to a low-carbon economy, and we manage a direct lending fund that is investing in businesses, small and middle-sized businesses. All of our strategies are long-term, all are active, and all integrate sustainability, environmental, social, and governance issues into the investment process. We do so in every respect because we think it allows us to be better investors. We use sustainability as a lens to make better investment decisions. We do not believe sustainability is optional. We do not believe that sustainability is a reduction in returns. Just the opposite. We believe that sustainability allows us to deliver better investment results. We are not trading values for value. The reason we took this approach nearly 11 years ago, and actually Al and I I think are good examples of how Generation was established in the first place. We felt that because the context of business was changing, because sustainability was relevant to companies, and I'll come back to that, we determined that bringing together a group of people that had both business and investing capabilities with public policy and sustainability credentials, and then melding them together in one team would allow us to make better investment decisions over time. Al's obviously has significant knowledge on sustainability and global issues, geopolitical issues. I have less credentials there, and certainly less credentials probably than many in this room on finance, but the bringing together was what we were trying to do. Also, actually, from a sustainability perspective, Al's interest obviously is in climate. It turns out mine is in poverty. And we realized very early on that the issues were the same, and that we needed to think of them in a holistic way. We need to think of business and investing in a holistic way. So our premise when we started, and it's clearly relevant to CalSTRS, is that long-term investing is best practice. When you have liabilities that will date out 65 years, in many cases for those teachers who are starting today, you need to be long-term as much as you can be. And therefore, and by the way, long-term investing, if you look at any corporate finance or investing textbook, will tell you long-term investing is best practice. The trick, of course, is doing it and fighting off the temptations to be shorter term in doing so. So with the first principle being that long-term investing is best practice, also incidentally, it was an interesting opportunity set because more and more investors are short-term investing, which is not investing but rather trading. But with that as a first principle, we then said, well, let's think about why we would, or how we would build an investment process, knowing that we were going to be long-term. The first observation that we made, and it's certainly been underscored, it certainly was just underscored with Al's presentation, is that the context of business was changing 10 or 15 years ago and is certainly changing today. What that means is that the issues that you need to think about as an investment professional or as a business professional is changing. So for example, climate change, water, health, long-term demographics, all of these issues are increasingly relevant to the context of business, the context of investing, and needs to be considered when you're building investment portfolios. And then secondly, we knew, based on our prior experiences, that sustainability was relevant, directly relevant to the long-term success of businesses. And this has been known for many, many years, and you can see it actually in one common statistic. All you need to do is look at the S&P 500 and say, okay, how many of the companies on the S&P 500 trade at book value? Turns out very few, if any. And the reason that they don't trade at book value, which is basically the total of their assets less their liabilities, what is the value of the company? The reason why they don't trade precisely there is that there are other factors that are affecting how people value those businesses. Those factors are basically sustainability factors in the broader sense. They're difficult to quantify issues that drive the success of businesses. For example, how you attract and retain your employees, your governance, your ethics, how you operate in your community, your carbon footprint. These are all factors that go into either overtly or inadvertently how people view the value of a company. Brand is a critical component of that as well. So we knew, even before we started drilling in, that there were other factors than just the balance sheet in the income statement that drove the long-term success of businesses. And then we began to think about carefully how businesses succeed. And we began to drill in to recognize that the broader issues around how you attract and retain your employees, how you operate in your community, how you think about resources, how you think about your governance factors, how you think about leadership, all of those factors drive the success of businesses. So we made the decision to integrate sustainability into all of our investment processes because we're long-term investors, we need to be holistic, and these issues matter to the long-term success of businesses and economies, for that matter. So we're now something in the order of 11 years old. We now have a 10-year track record, unofficially as of February 1st, officially as of April 1st. The statisticians will tell you that that does not yet prove skill. We are still subject to luck, and actually luck is a good thing, generally.
I think it proves skill.
That's his prior experience, I think. But to date, we've been able to generate, as you all know, very significant outperformance in our investment portfolios because we're integrating sustainability into the investment process. It's also true that we, as I said, there's been good fortune. I think we're good stock pickers, but sustainability is our lens to help us make better investment decisions. So what have we learned in that, however, and that's what I want to share with you as sort of the business case for sustainable investing. And it really comes down to three fundamental points, two of which I think are almost undisputable. The third will take some more time to fully establish. The first is that sustainability, again, broadly defined, and everybody will think of sustainability differently. I know that that is a subject that you as the board will continue to discuss. But sustainability, broadly defined, we have discovered and categorically believe is a terrific risk mitigation tool. And in fact, I would say, again, most investors would agree with that. So, for example, if you can avoid investing in businesses that dump a lot of oil into the Gulf of Mexico, that's likely to be a good outcome. In fact, if you think about the very best investors in the world, if you analyze their track record, what you will discover is that they tend to avoid very big mistakes. Therefore, they have good risk management systems. That's ultimately what sustainability is. It gives you a broader lens to think about, maybe not completely avoid. Lord knows we make plenty of mistakes at Generation, but it gives you an opportunity to see things in a more holistic way and to reduce the probability of making significant mistakes. The second point, we know, as Al said in his presentation, that we live in a resource-constrained world. It's going to become increasingly resource-constrained. There's no question about that. Therefore, if you can find businesses that recognize that and are operating, realizing that they need to be more efficient with how they utilize resources, how they think about the cost inputs of their business, those tend to be well-managed businesses, and those certainly tend to be businesses that have a lower cost, and therefore, over time, higher profitability and better competitive positioning. For us, however, sustainability has been a lens to help us proactively choose better businesses, better management teams. And we use sustainability, and what the third point is to identify businesses that use their products and services to address sustainability challenges and therefore ultimately driving revenues, profitability, and competitive positioning. Those are the businesses that are in your portfolio. Those are the businesses we think that are most interesting on a long-term basis, and those are the businesses that we think are most sustainable with a little s in terms of the profitability of those companies and those investments over time. The last thing I want to say is on the transition to a low-carbon economy, which is clearly what Al was ending with. Let me just say this. From an investment perspective, it's a big deal. It's an issue from a risk perspective, the carbon exposure, the real estate exposure, et cetera. These are relevant factors in understanding the broader asset allocation and portfolios that you all are responsible for. But it's a great opportunity as well. Every single thing that we've done today will need to change over the next 5, 10, 15 years. Investing in the transition to a low-carbon economy, which is happening even as we speak, is not just wind and solar. There's multiple factors that we will need to consider as we make that transition. Generation has a matrix that actually is, and we've deliberately decided to focus our interest, but we have a matrix that goes down six on sort of the down axis and 5 across. That's 30 different industries that are part of the transition to a low-carbon economy that we're actively researching. We could make that matrix even bigger if we wanted to. The point is that the opportunity set, ranging from energy efficiency to recycling to logistics, are all interesting opportunities, and they need to be invested in now. Let me just, I think, close there. We were told that giving you all a chance to ask questions would be a good thing. And we are now open for business.
Board members? John?
Can you comment on the uniqueness of CalSTRS and Vice President, obviously you've been an early mover on this way back when, speaking of Global Milken Conference, shedding this to light at CII. And David, you brought up 5, 10, 15-year horizon. The board, government, education, people from the private sector, where you think we ought to be, what we ought to be thinking about, and what you think we ought to be planning and moving on.
Let me begin and then hand it off to David. Long-term investors with a fiduciary responsibility to teachers, for example, have a pretty simple task if you look at it from 50,000 feet. You need to match the long-term performance of your assets to the long-term maturation of your liabilities. And you know when certain cohorts are going to retire. You can predict with your great staff what the different drawdowns are going to be. So you have the luxury and the obligation to take a long-term view. That's why CalSTR's role, and it's not the only such institution, but that's why your role is so unique and potentially so powerful. This transition to a low-carbon economy and the transition to a more sustainable economy in the other dimensions that we've referred to necessarily will take place over a longer term. Economists routinely talk about short-termism as one of the great problems in the U.S. and global economies writ large, but you have the luxury of canceling out some of that short-term noise and looking clearly at what the longer-term trends are. So it gives you potentially a lot of power to define what best practice is and to pull other long-term investors toward a clear-sighted vision as you come to it.
I guess what I would add is, first of all, the fact that we're having this discussion today is critical and important. And as many of you know, we've had a similar discussion in the autumn. And it's fair to say that, important to say that Chris and Jack have been on this subject for a long time. In fact, we've been partners together for 8 years, and so this is not the first time that y'all are thinking about it, which is terrific.